Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, however you'd like to say it. The date I'm actually recording this is February 8th, 2013. I know I've stepped away for a little while. Had a couple things I had to take care of. Picked up another job, whole 9 yards. Well, in today's video, what I want to talk to you guys about is basic firearm maintenance. Things that you should be looking for opposed to things they shouldn't be looking for. We're going to just talk about springs. We're going to get into revolvers. We're even going to talk about the ultimate one, right? Then we're going to talk about America's favorite. I know a lot of people who own these. Okay. Well, first thing I want to talk to you about is, we'll call it a oops move. One of the last times I went down to the range, I went out with a friend of mine and his father, and he accidentally did pull an oops move. And what do I call an oops move? It's a good question. Well, I had a friend of mine, when he brought out his Spikes Tactical 7.62x39 upper for his AR, he accidentally loaded a .223 round into it. And for those of you who don't think that the SKS would actually be able to handle it, the one thing that the SKS, the AK-47, and most of the 7.62x39 variants, or, you know, things of that nature, they all have one thing in common. They all have the magazine lips. The things that actually hold the rounds in the magazine, right? Everybody calls them different things. We'll call them lips in this video. He accidentally loaded a .223 round into it. And, well, this is the exact round that he loaded in. He loaded in, fired it, and that's what ended up happening. Yeah, sorry about the light, but yeah, you can see that nice little split right there. Fire formed to the chamber, whole 9 yards. The .22 caliber obviously didn't come out with a lot of force. And for those of you who think that you can't load .223 into it, you got another thing coming. I have 4 different rounds in my hand, and all of them are, you know, different calibers, different brass sizes, whole 9 yards. Well, first round I'm going to load in is 5.56, otherwise known as a .223. Hey, that one loaded in. Next round, 5.45x39. Hey, that one loaded in too. How about the ever famous 300 Blackout? Right? That one went in. How about the round design for this weapon? Yep, that one went in too. Now, obviously the bolt, when it came back, didn't pick up the round and remove it. Thank God one of us actually keeps a cleaning rod around whenever we go to the range, because that's actually how we had to get that case out. Beat it out. Had to be done. It actually went that far, and yeah. Well, the weapon was actually fine. There was no damage done to it, nothing like that. So, with that being said, let's get on with the rest of this video. When we talk about the AR-15 bolts, I'm going to tell you about a issue I was having and give me a little bit of an insight, right? So, let's start off with wheel guns. Most of us have one, right? I've got a few. The thing you're going to have to realize is wheel guns will always be more reliable than any semi-automatic handgun on the market. There's less moving parts, there's less things to go wrong, and obviously in the interest of time, this one's unloaded. But for what we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about something different. Now, obviously, you're looking at my Smith & Wesson 27-2. Phenomenal firearm. Works like a champ every time I asked it to. I've taken it to the range. I put, I don't know how many rounds through it. I actually got this for an incredible deal. So, basic things you want to look for. Say you're at the range, right? You're shooting either 38 Special, 357 Magnum, you know, one of those two through it. And all of a sudden, all you're getting out of all cylinders is click, click, click. What could be going wrong? More than likely, it's the spring right here, your mainspring. They have a tendency to go over time. They're just like any other firearm. You're going to have to maintain them, and you're going to have to give them a little love every once in a while, right? I don't know how many rounds has been through this. I keep a spare one in my house, just so that this way I don't have to go out and order another one. Now, as well as that, while I have the cover off, the thing you're going to have to do also is you're also going to have to take into consideration whenever you're running double action, your hammer isn't moving as far back as single action. Now, where a double action is typically going to break, it's right about there, you know? About a 1/4 inch away from the frame. See? The reason being is obviously you're not going to get that hammer drop as in a single action where you're going to put a little bit more force on the primer. Now, let me cock it into single action. You see how much farther back that hammer went versus double? That's single. Say that's double. Right? You're talking that's a good 1/4 inch in between the frame. That can actually play a very crucial part. Now, say you're looking at a revolver or a wheel gun or whatever you want to call them in a store. You're looking to buy one, right? I'm going to use this one as an example, even though nothing is wrong. Things you want to look for. Obviously, double action is one thing. You won't be able to tell if the mainspring is shot in the store or from a second party. Maybe if you're out in Tennessee or Kentucky, you got about 30 acres of land, your neighbors don't really care, you can go out and run a cylinder through, right? But the real way to tell is take it down to the range. If you're buying it from a friend, you know, a lot of times you can trust your friend, but still say, hey, do you mind meeting me down at the range? Yeah, I want to try it, you know, something like that. Stores, you're at their mercy. A lot of them aren't going to let you take it out of the store, take it down to the range, and expect it to work. Technically, a store does not have to sell you a working firearm. Technically. Now, let's talk about as well as in single action, right? Say you're in a store, you're feeling out the weapon, you like it. But, as in single action, here's one thing you want to look for. It's what's known as hammer push-off. Hammer push-off is actually when you can take your thumb, put pressure on the hammer as it's cocked, and if the hammer jerks back, there's an issue with it. It's not so. I'm going to just use my finger for this one. You're not supposed to be able to take your finger and have that happen. It's supposed to just stay still. Now, a lot of times what ends up happening is people who take apart their weapon to modify them, at least in revolver status, they polish up too much of the internals. They do things they're not supposed to, so you don't know what internally the person has done. This could actually be a good buying point if you really like the weapon. If you really like the weapon, you could say, hey, look, you got it marked out there at 3. Tell you what, I'll give you 2 cash right now. Because you already know point blank, you're going to have to do some kind of work to it. And work on revolvers is a lot easier to work on than, say, a Glock. There's less moving parts, less things that can go wrong, and the parts are still as readily available as ever. Sometimes you can even call the manufacturer and get them. So, now that we've talked about revolvers, let's talk about some Glocks. Glocks have all one thing in common. They're definitely user-friendly. Glocks, you could do a lot of things with them. Obviously, you're noticing sandpaper look, right? My own personal preference. When I pick it up, I like to be able to feel it. I like to be able to keep it in my hand. Now, Glocks, you could do a lot with it. This one has seen well over 3,000 rounds. It's been well taken care of. Let's start off by talking internals. What you could do with an internal of a Glock, full-size frames, you could do a little bit more so than with the compact, subcompact frame. Full-size frame, you could actually drop the trigger weight on a Glock down to a half a pound. Yes, a half a pound. I have seen it. I have felt it. The kit goes for about $300 on Brownells. What you could actually do, if you really wanted to, you got your Glock, you don't like the way that trigger feels, right? You've already ran 500-600 rounds. Technically, right about there is when that trigger is supposed to be breaking in. Say after 1,000 rounds or so, you like the trigger, but you don't. You can actually do what's known as a trigger job. And what you're going to do is you're going to polish up the internals. You're going to take out the factory trigger bar, and you're going to drop in a lower weight trigger bar. This one happens to be a 3.5 pound Ghost trigger. And after I polished everything up, I put that in. Felt like a brand new gun. I love it. I actually did that within about 200 rounds of owning it. And that's just because of my personal preference. Now, say you wanted a heavier trigger. A heavier trigger is typically known as a battle trigger. What you're going to do, again, you're going to polish up all the internals, right? Everything you have to do. You're going to drop the trigger weight down. Now what in turn you're going to do is you're going to add a spring into it. You're going to turn it in from a normal trigger job to a New York trigger job. And what it's going to do is it's going to make that trigger go from, say, 5 pounds. We'll say safely, right? It's going to increase it to about 11, but that trigger is going to be very crisp, very smooth. I like them, but I don't. Everybody has their own personal preference. Glock is a perfect toy to play with. Now, as we're on that subject, stainless steel guide rod. You could pick these things up off of eBay for 10, 20 bucks, right? And it'll come with a heavier spring than your stock one. I preferably like the heavier spring. Everybody's different, right? What you could also do is you could, the firing pin, you could change it out to like a titanium or something like that, make it light, it'll strike faster. Let's talk about barrels. Factory Glock barrel, obviously it's a 9mm, right? 9 by 19. So, I I already told you point blank there's about 5,000 or 3,000 plus rounds through this, right? Well, how could that be? It looks like there's no wear. Exactly my point. I take care of my weapons. My Glock travels with me. It is me, right? Those who know me know I don't leave my house without it. But the one thing that you'll always notice on a Glock from people who don't take care of them, you'll always see a lot of white marks up here. And it's not necessarily from a firearm that wasn't well taken care of. It probably was, but the owner didn't like to lubricate the barrel. Same thing over here. You're gonna notice you're gonna notice the top of the barrel going white. Again, nothing wrong, but I'm one of those people that when I have a firearm, I like to maintain it as good as possible. I want to make sure that, say, 30 years from now, that weapon is still in the same exact condition that I bought it in, if not better. Now, the other thing that you could also do with the Glock and any other handgun, obviously you can go on eBay or something like that, get yourself a couple or get yourself a set of Talon grips, you know, pay the 20 bucks, 10, 20 bucks, something like that. Why pay the 10 or 20 bucks for one grip when you could pay 10, maybe 15 bucks, right? And get yourself a ton of grips. This isn't sandpaper. This is actually what's known as deck tape. Deck tape's the same stuff that you can actually put on skateboards and stuff like that. It gives the rider a better grip, lets them hang on to the board a little bit better. But again, everybody's different. The one thing I like about deck tape too is that you can have different comfort levels. You can have a really fine grit, you can have a coarse grit, or you can have a really, really textured grip. Obviously, you don't have to put it up here, but during the summer, it helps. So, let's talk about Mr. America's favorite. Well, America's favorite, it's not perfect. Far from it. This is one handgun you will have to do some kind of maintenance on. And you don't have to send it out to a gunsmith to do it. Wait, what? Yeah, you don't. It's a big fallacy. 1911's the biggest things that can go wrong is one, recoil spring, right? Recoil spring, mainspring, firing pin spring. There's a bunch of springs in here. Now, as for recommended changing, well, I already changed out all the springs in here. I went with all Wilson Combat internals. Good reason behind it. I like the way they feel. Technically, I got a Kimber frame with a Wilson Wilson trigger. But here's the good part. A lot of the newer guns, they're not going to tell you this. You're going to actually have to go online and do some kind of research, and everybody's will be a little bit different. Biggest thing you're going to end up doing is you're going to end up replacing the recoil spring. Unless you shoot it every day, you put 200 rounds through it, you're going to end up having to do some kind of repair work. Now, the first spring that's always going to go wrong is the recoil spring. You know, I typically change them, you know, safely 2,000 rounds, right? They're no more than a couple bucks. You can replace all the springs for less than 20 bucks if you want to run with like Colt. I ended up dumping about 40 to 50 bucks in springs, right? But I knew what I was getting. The recoil spring, you typically can change 2,000 rounds or so. Your firing pin spring, well, that's a different story. You can get roughly about 5,000 rounds out of those safely. I mean, if you start noticing where every once in a while you'll go click, cock the hammer back, bang. Cock your hammer back, next one goes off. If you typically start seeing that, your firing pin spring is probably going bad. But if it's not that, it's your hammer spring, right? And they're not hard to replace. If you actually backtrack a little bit, you'll actually see the video on the disassembly and whatnot. And there's no big thing on replacing your springs. It's just a matter of whether you want it to strike light or you want it to strike hard. I typically like going a little heavier on springs, only for the reason why they last a little bit longer. If you go with a 18-pound spring for your recoil spring, you typically go about 3,000 rounds, no issue. But again, you're still going to have to do some kind of maintenance on them. So, now that we've talked about that, I'm going to put this off to the side for right now. I'm going to put this back in its holster. Let's talk about evil black rifles. Why could I want to talk about those? Very easy, actually. The AR series is another weapon that should be talked about. There are pieces in here that even you're going to have to replace. My personal favorite AR, the first one I ever got, I shot the hell out of. I still do. I've got roughly 5, 10... I lost how many thousand rounds I've thrown through it. But that's besides the point. Every AR is going to need some kind of maintenance. If you're doing gas impingement. If you're doing a piston impingement, that's a different story. Everybody says, well, they're more reliable. Well, they're more reliable if you're firing it full auto. You can go a lot longer without something going wrong. Full auto on a M16. If you get that gas tube really, really, really hot, you'll actually see it melt. And you can actually see it melt on, I think it's the Big Shooter's channel. I'll put his link down there. And he's a good old boy out in Maine. He's not afraid to get online and explain stuff. That's what he does for a living. But what I want to talk to you about, at least on an AR, is things that you can look for that will be going wrong over a period of time. Let's start off up top. This right here is your gas key, right? This piece. That's what's known as your gas key. Those can go wrong. You notice one thing on this? You see how you have the two screws? They're staked down. Staked that way for a reason. Make sure they don't back off. You could stake them a couple different ways. That's a factory Colt bolt. I really don't use this bolt too much. I think I've only put about 200 rounds through that one. And there's a reason behind it. But you could definitely notice the difference. These were done by a friend of mine. This was done by the factory. Everybody has their own different staking method. Now, besides that, what else are you looking for? Well, say those don't look like they were played with, but yet your gas key moves. Gas key's worn out. Replace it. $6. 2 screws, another $1.50. Stake them down, torque them. Your weapon will be good for another few thousand rounds. Now, the biggest thing that can go wrong with it is your piston rings. Easiest way to check for them. Take your bolt, stand it down on end with it extended all the way down, and if it doesn't move, you know you got good compression. And again, I'll do it with my other bolt, but I just actually had to replace that because I was actually having an issue. What mine was doing, and it started going. I didn't really pay too much attention because I had other bolts I could play with. What mine ended up doing was when it ejected the round, right? Went to pick up the next round from the magazine. It wasn't going all the way back. It was actually half shucking, and the bolt was closing before it was supposed to. So what was happening? It was pushing the round back. You can see how nice that 22 caliber looks, right? So essentially, what ended up happening was it would actually get stuck right on the feeding ramp, and it would hurt my ammo. And I wasn't even shooting fully loaded magazines either. I think one magazine had 7 rounds in it on a 30 round box. That's nothing. Now, what I want to do too is I want to take down both of these bolts. Both of these bolts have something different between them. Now, I said that I just had to replace the piston rings. AR-15 bolts are nothing to take down. They're actually really easy and simple. I'm going to push that one off to the side. And a good tight cotter pin is actually going to require something just to pull it out. So don't think I'm harming it. That's why I'm actually using a flathead screwdriver on the inside. Okay. Now that I have these two apart, they both look identical, right? Can you tell the difference? You really can't unless you start spinning them around. Your typical AR-15 gas piston, right? It's actually called a bolt, but I'll call it a piston for right now because, yeah, has 3 gas rings in it, right? They always have to be offset just to keep compression. These will wear out a lot quicker than some of the other ones. Now, the reason why, you got to look at it like look at them as if they're your car. Your car also has gas or piston rings in them too. They keep oil from getting burned up unless you got a bent valve or something like that. They do a lot of good. They keep your car running right. You want to keep your gun running right, right? Listen up. If you notice, on every gas ring, they're offset. That's the middle ring. That's the top ring. And they're always going to fluctuate. So you ain't really got to worry about that. Now, what ends up happening is they're going to start wearing out. You're not going to notice it in here, right? It's not something that you can say, oh yeah, your cylinder wall is a little scored up. Mechanics' favorite words when they just want to sell you an engine. They will do that. They will just, when you stand them on end, they'll just sink. Now, McFarlane gas rings are a little bit different. They're about, I think it's $2 more than standard gas rings. A whole lot better. McFarlane gas rings have something completely different to them. McFarlane gas rings look more like a spring. This is actually a bail spring for an old pen spinning reel. They'll look more like this. Now I know what you're thinking. How the hell do you get them on and off? Same way how you get them on or off any other way. You actually got to walk them around. Now, if I spin this around very slowly, you'll see point blank that there's no gaps except on the ends. So you, instead of having 3 rings, and some places you're going to have as many as 4. So, in ways, which is better for the money? You got your McFarlane or standard gas ring. Well, do you want to replace them every month if you shoot a lot? Or do you want to replace them maybe once a year? Well, McFarlane is the answer. Now, if you're just a typical shooter who will take his AR out once every month and only maybe run 50 to 100 rounds through it, you can get away with the regular gas rings. But if you want something where you're not going to have to change it for a while, run with McFarlane. Say you're that type of person that brings them out once a year, maybe twice a year max, right? You bring it out just to show off. Oh yeah, hey, I got one. Hey. The regular gas rings will be fine for you. Full auto's a whole nother story. I don't own any full auto products, so we're not going to talk about those. But now that I've at least given you a basic understanding of things that you should look for in each firearm, things that you should do, I'm going to turn off the camera. I got some shoveling to do. Great. The 4th time today. With that being said, I'm going to turn off the camera. You guys have yourself a wonderful day. Have yourself a wonderful evening, wonderful night, what have you. I'm going to turn off the camera. I got to do a little bit of cleanup. I got to put this thing back together. And then I got to go play in that white fluffy crap. So until the next time, I'll talk to you guys later. Have yourself a nice day. And remember, fight for every one of your rights.